Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. Welcome to the Kickstarter space. It's the first year we've had something like this at the festival, so we're really excited to share it with everybody. My name's Liz Cook. I head up documentary films at Kickstarter, and I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have an incredible panel for you. So with that, thank you to all of our panelists and our moderator for being here, and I'll hand it off.
Thank you. So hello, my name is Moira Griffin. I am Senior Manager of Diversity Initiatives at the Sundance Institute, working to bring in more women and more people of color into the Institute, and then looking at ways to support them after. And I'm really excited to moderate this panel of industry veterans who can really sort of talk a lot about, sort of how are you marketing to African American, Black audiences, and when we're sort of thinking about raising money also, in Kickstarter, what does that actually look like, what your experiences were. And to my right, I have Dawn Porter. And I'm going to have everybody sort of speak a little bit about themselves, okay? Director Dawn Porter. We have Marie Nelson from PBS right after. Dolly Turner, who's a consultant. And then after that, there's Stanley Nelson, director, and then Sonya Childress, who also is a part of Firelight and director of Firelight. So they're all going to sort of give a little brief introduction about themselves as well. Go ahead.
Hi, happy to be here. I'm Dawn Porter. I'm a documentary director. My film Trapped premieres tomorrow. In 2013, I had a film here, Gideon's Army.
I am proud to say that Dawn Porter's film will be on PBS in June of 2016. I'm Marie Nelson, and I'm the Vice President of News, Public Affairs, and Documentary at PBS, and I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Hi, I'm Dolly Turner. I'm president of the Turner Group. I do marketing, outreach, and engagement. My most recent project was 25 to Life, where I was associate producer. We're in the process of embarking upon our outreach program.
I've got one. Hi, I'm Stanley Nelson. I am a film director. I had a film here last year, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, that then went on to a theatrical release. It was my 8th film that I directed that's premiered here at Sundance. We can talk about all that. And then I work with the Firelight Media, what are we calling it now? Documentary Lab. That works, so, excuse me, we just changed the name, it's not as bad as it sounds, that works with filmmakers of color to get their films out and recognized and on the air.
And Black Panthers will be airing on PBS on February 16th.
And the Black Panthers will be airing on PBS on February 16th all across the country. Thank you.
And I'm Sonya Childress. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Engagement for Firelight Media. So I do the audience engagement and impact campaigns for all the films that Stanley produces, which are, come out every 4 hours. And I also provide engagement and impact support for all of the 20 filmmakers that are in Firelight's Doc Lab. And then I also do campaigns for independent producers that hire us.
So I'm going to start with sort of with Stanley and Sonya, really sort of talking about, your film is about to air on PBS. You've already had a theatrical release. Walk us through a little bit in terms of how did you use, Kickstarter? How did you think about your engagement? Sort of walk us through a little bit of that process leading up to the release of your film theatrically.
I'll probably just glaze over the surface and let Sonya dig in deep. So the Black Panthers Vanguard of the Revolution premiered here last year at Sundance, and it's a film for PBS, and PBS immediately said that they wanted to do a theatrical release for the film, and they were going to put some money into that. And so we realized that one of the things about theatrical releases and publicity and those kind of things is you can spend literally limitless amounts of money. I mean, however much money you want, you can spend going up to, TV ads on the Super Bowl, but you're probably not going to have that much money. So you can spend whatever you want, but we realized that we could hopefully raise some more money to augment the money that PBS was going to put in. So we started our first Kickstarter campaign. And our goal was to raise $50,000. We ended up raising $65,000. We had way over 900 contributors, but I think even more importantly, which I didn't realize, when we started was that it kind of puts you on the map with so many people. If we had almost 1,000 contributors, I don't know how many thousand, what would you say, 20,000 or more emails that we sent out to different people. And those people all then started kind of, not all of them, but a lot of them started following the film, even if they didn't contribute. So we started to have this whole, constituency, this whole family who knew about the film. And that was really important for us, as the film went on. Sonya, do you want to?
I think, Stanley's films typically get a national PBS broadcast, either on American Experience or one of the other major strands. And we knew we were going to get a broadcast with this film. It's the first of a 3-part series called America Revisited that kind of centers African American history as American history. So we knew we were going to get a broadcast. But what was unique was that we actually had an opportunity through PBS to have a theatrical release. And Stanley, although he's been at Sundance 8 times, has been around for, since Dirks, Jesus was a baby, and making films. A theatrical is really new for us as an organization, and so I think we really saw it as an opportunity to reach a different kind of audience. We spent a lot of time with Freedom Writers and Freedom Summer and Emmett Till. We spent a lot of time, Jonestown, with trying to reach, underserved, diverse, younger audiences and bring them and cajole them to come to PBS for one night to just watch this film. But I think having a theatrical release really allows us to bring the film into communities that we're really trying to reach. So it was a great opportunity. And we also knew that our broadcast was going to be a year from our release. The film released in January here at Sundance. We knew we would have a festival release. We knew we would have a theatrical in the fall, and that we wouldn't have a broadcast until the following February. So we had a 12-month window, essentially. And I think it gave us a great amount of time to kind of build momentum and deepen relationships with not only high-profile folks who would kind of be our ambassadors, but also nonprofit organizations that could do a lot of that, bringing people out to theatrical, bringing them to the broadcast. And I think for internally, I think our strategy with a film like Panthers is obviously the timing of the Panthers coming out in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the midst of this rash of high-profile police killings, was so prescient that in some ways it was an amazing opportunity to draw some really obvious parallels and connect with Black Lives Matter organizers around the country and the conversation, the national debate. On the other hand, we had to it was a little bit of a struggle not to let that take over the history of this film and the real, the legacy of the Panthers, which is very different and unique from Black Lives Matter. So I think we tried to, walk that line by engaging Black Lives Matter organizers, both in the Kickstarter campaign, in the theatrical release. We made sure that for our theatrical release, we started with 8 cities. We opened in over 60 cities in the US and the UK and grossed at least $600,000, which I think for us was great for a first time at a theatrical. I think part of our strategy was reach a really young audience, and reach organizers that are really heavily invested in these issues, and have Stanley essentially live in theaters for the duration of the theatrical run, and have him crisscross the country and be at every opening that in a major market, because we opened in landmark theaters, which has this new rule now where essentially you can do a Q&A, which is amazing to bring those Q&As into theaters, but you can only do it if the filmmaker is there present or if a subject is present. So unless we had Stanley there, we couldn't bring, and we had made promises to many of the organizations we had tried to reach out to around our Kickstarter, that if you help to support our Kickstarter and promote it and support it in any way you can and amplify the message, you can do a Q&A. You can host theatrical Q&As when this film comes to your city. But then this rule came, which hampered it a bit. So we did as much as we could to engage Black Lives Matter organizers as moderators of conversations with Stanley and Black Panthers. So they would tweet out to their 40,000 followers. So we would have DeRay McKesson, who's everywhere, tweet out to his 40,000 followers. And we would have him in conversation and have this intergenerational conversation about the legacy of the Panthers. So we were trying to, I think, touch on the zeitgeist, reach this population that we know are thinking about these issues, and also use it as an opportunity to talk about the issues in the film.
Okay, great. And then also, so Dawn, you raised money in terms of focusing on your production. You've already done a successful, film that already came out, was on HBO. Why did you feel the need to do a Kickstarter campaign for your second film as opposed to, trying to raise money or, in different ways? Or did you feel like this was just the most successful way to kind of push Trap, to the next level?
With Gideon's Army, the Ford Foundation was a huge backer, and then HBO bought it. So I didn't have the same funding journey. We had a lot of outreach partners, but with Trapped, the timing, so making a film about abortion clinics and ongoing litigation, and so it was just this, we're doing everything all at once. We didn't have the luxury of waiting to raise money. So we got a big boost from MacArthur Foundation, got a number of independent private people supporting the film. But what I realized, one of the things that happens when you get a grant from a big foundation is you also get a press bump. People learn about your project. And because I needed to constantly be out and having people talk about it, we felt like I really, and Liz knows this, came kicking and screaming to Kickstarter. And now I'm like, look, I'm on the wall. And I think everybody should look at that wall, because I think it's a testament to whether you come like me kicking and screaming or you embrace it, it's clearly working for what we do. And it's not just for raising money, but for, as Sonya and Stanley are talking about, raising audience awareness. I think a really key thing, the topic of this panel is reaching underserved audiences. And I think that starts with not who you are necessarily as a filmmaker, but how you approach your subject and who's in your movie. And so it was important to me to see, I picked the best character I could pick, who also is an African-American doctor who was raised in the South. And he is as much front and center as I can be to say to people, this is a movie that is something different about this topic. And I find myself, I seek out Asian characters, I seek out Latino characters, I seek out Black characters. And I hoped by showcasing, we have a range of people and voices that would appeal to people. But it very much was, as Stanley and Sonya were saying, we needed to reach our critical voices. So we had Planned Parenthood, NARAL, those people pushing our message out, but also RH Reality Check, Sister Song. We did a lot of ground build work with communities of color who are in the reproductive justice space, who are doing a lot of work. I didn't invent this movement at all. I'm kind of looking to them to help us. And we are doing a big theatrical. We have a very ambitious theatrical campaign coming up and community screenings. We're working with Rocco Films and Abramarama. We'll be in Landmark theaters. So we hope to have, I hope we make that much money, but I really hope that we need to have a lot of screenings. And the way to do that is to get these on the ground communities to embrace and own. We're asking people to adopt a screening, so I now find out I'm gonna be on the road. That's like, I guess I just found that out.
One of the interesting things is, both of you are working with, big organizations or movements to actually get the word out. And I think a lot of people, when they do Kickstarter campaigns, don't actually have that sort of opportunity, and when they're thinking about, what are my gifts and what are the sort of basic things to make sure that they're keeping up with. When you're working with a large organization, how do you make sure that the gifts or, whatever that you're giving back to the people who are donating to you are something that you can fulfill on, right? And then also when you're thinking about your audience, you were talking about reaching a younger audience, millennials especially. What was your focus in terms of your audience? And then how do you sort of bridge all of these things to make sure that you're actually, fulfilling and able to fulfill your mission of the goal of your film?
For our film, the Supreme Court is going to hear a challenge to the trap laws, which are the subject of my film, on March 2nd. Everybody should pay attention to this and let the Supreme Court know what you think. And then there's going to be a decision in June. And one of the goals we had was to reach as many people as possible and tell them that this was happening, because people are not all kind of aware that this a decision that could overturn Roe v. Wade is happening. So when we were thinking about what we wanted to give back, I think people for film, they like being part of a film community. So, we're both on PBS. You have to work within the PBS rules about who you can thank. And so we did a number of things. We worked closely with PBS. We weren't even sold to them yet, but we said, if we get sold to you, what are the rules? Just so that we could not foreclose a very important audience. We're going to end our theatrical and community and all the rest of it with a screening on PBS that could reach every household in America. So we needed to preserve that audience. People like to feel like they're part of a film. So if you can give them behind the scenes, interviews, if you can give them things that make them feel part of something. We tried to think about things like that we could fulfill. And then we have a really amazing poster, which all our characters will sign. And so we did things like that. But I think when you have an issue film, you want to invite people into your process and let them know how much you appreciate them as an audience.
We had never done a crowdfunding campaign, so we knew, we were really in the dark. And that's Liz and Dan at Kickstarter were like godsends to us. I mean, they really held our hands through the whole process. And we called a lot of people. Steve James's, life itself. I mean, we called everyone we knew and asked for best practices, and we got a lot of really great advice. I'm not going to share any of that. No, I'm just kidding. No, just kidding. No, but one of the really key pieces of advice, which many of you probably already know, which we didn't, and thankfully we heard, was, when you think about the money that will go into a Kickstarter campaign or any kind of crowdfunding campaign, you take a dip with, sending, just postage alone is really going to hurt you. So as many things that you can offer that are digital, that do not cost, to fulfill are really key. And so that really helped us to start thinking creatively. And we thought, well, what are people buying into? Well, with Panthers, it's a historical doc. The transcript is really rich, but an annotated transcript with a lot of key information, so people can find out more about, all of the citations for the film was useful, and that actually did really well as a reward. We also thought about people might want access to Stanley. We thought about, sending him around the country to go to people's homes. He said no. But he did agree to do virtual mentorships to people and to look at their scripts, hear their stories, and give, half-hour, conversations and look at anything that they wanted to show him and give feedback. We asked a few other filmmakers to do that for us, and that did really well for us as well. So those kinds of, access to Stanley, access to the content in a real deep way. I mean, clearly, for a film like, when we knew we had a theatrical, one of our biggest rewards was theatrical tickets. People wanted access to the film. They knew there was going to be a broadcast, but they wanted access to the film early. So clearly, theatrical tickets. And then conversations with Panthers. We're doing Google Hangouts, private Hangouts with Stanley and Panthers. Who doesn't want to talk to like Kathleen Cleaver on the phone, or whatever, and Stanley Nelson. So that also did well for us.
Yeah, that sounds great.
But we have Panthers who are cool as hell. I mean.
And then when you have two films like this that have, these strong campaigns that they're building these audiences, and then you're sort of, you're always, kind of pushing that out in the end. One is theatrical, but then the other one is obviously the broadcast. How does PBS then build on all of the momentum that these projects are then building? How do you build on that in order to make sure that the audience that you're trying to reach that maybe didn't see it theatrically actually gets this chance to see and know where it is on PBS?
Well, I'll take a second just to shout out a couple of people who are here in the room, because I think that they were instrumental in us, evolving our thinking in this area. We've got Beth Hoppy here, our Chief Programming Officer for PBS, and also Andrea Downing, who's at PBS Distribution. And as when, maybe going backwards to Stanley's film, I think that there was a realization that there was increasing success in reaching new audiences by trying to create that linkage between theatrical and broadcast, and realizing that in many ways, the theatrical could help you do a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the engagement in grassroots level activism and press and everything, so that by the time you got to broadcast, you had created even more excitement for those folks who are now then going to be able to access this, free and over the airwaves. And I think that is something that certainly has guided us throughout. At PBS, we know that independent film, and we're proud of the fact that independent film has been attracting younger and more diverse audiences, but there's also a recognition that we still have a long way to go in that arena. And so supporting films that deal with, particularly that type of content coming out of a time, as Sonya was talking about, just in terms of, when the film was just about to become ready for a festival and all of that, we were just coming out of the wake of Ferguson. And so knowing that these are the types of topics and the types of things that really are going to reach and connect you to audiences that you want to find you, it's really a no-brainer to try and pursue that strategy. And I think we were really proud initially. Our sights might have been a bit more modest in terms of hoping to maybe bring the film to 8 or 10 cities. And with some concerted effort, at the end of the day, we reached over 150 screenings and events around the country. And Sonya's told you about some of the performance. And so we know that when you're able to do that, that you're going to continue to bring those people back and make them have an awareness and appreciation that public broadcasting really is for them.
So now, but how does PBS then also, because you really have an online momentum, how does PBS then engage also with audiences online to let them, even once they've seen the broadcast of the film, how are you engaging with them afterwards in order to make sure that, they continue to know know when it's playing on PBS, that they're able to push it out? How does that work, within the PBS system?
We've definitely been able to work on the digital side of things a couple of different ways. Of course, we've got our partners here from Independent Lens who have supported both these projects. That's right. And as part of Independent Lens, in terms of the contracts, we always make sure that we maintain a free streaming window around these films so that people will have access to them through pbs.org, through and through our partner sites. And then, of course, we also work in a concerted way with Netflix and Roku and Amazon to also arrange, for streaming opportunities for people to continue, for the film to have a whole other life.
Do you think this is, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say, every broadcaster has a different feeling about theatrical. And I really appreciate PBS has really wholly embraced. When you're in independent film, particularly independent docs, we don't have New York Times advertisement money every Sunday. That's not how we're gonna, so we need to do a slow build. And I think PBS has had a very sophisticated approach to understanding that the slow build we do over 6 months leads to a big bang. It's that slow growth and that penetration across the country that is actually very good for them. I think also there's been a lot of education on the side of the filmmakers and on the broadcasters in how we assure that the windows work for everybody. And I think folks are much more open to being very honest. Lois and the team at Independent Lens they teach us a lot about this is how this works with Netflix. This will work for you, and this works with us. So instead of it being a combative, where the filmmaker can feel like you're caught in the middle. There's been, I think, a really nice kind of everybody coming to the table saying, this is all good for all of us if we can make this work. So they are basically like, run, do what you can. I so appreciate every time I go to them, they're like, yeah, do that. That sounds great. That really helps us with, that's what makes you excited, that you're gonna be with your audiences and then have this big, dessert wedding at the end.
So one thing I'd like to add to that discussion is I think it's a unique situation sometimes when you have an opportunity to work as closely with your network from the beginning. So a lot of times what may happen with some filmmakers is the television licensing has been done through your distributor, the person who acquired the film for theatrical and possibly digital. Doesn't necessarily mean that all of those people talk to each other all the time. So it's going to require you to become sort of like the captain and the CEO of the marketing team. And it's going to be important for you to bring all of those parties and entities together. I've seen a lot of instances where those people don't talk to each other at all. And sometimes, even as a filmmaker, you may find very late what your television licensing or release date is going to be. So in the beginning, when you're starting to do your deal with the distributor, I think it's very important for you to tell them what role you would like to play and what your expectations are around your release program, and that you would like to be a part of the dialogue and the conversations and be active and very participative in the discussions around how each one of those platforms is going to release your film. Because what's important today in marketing, I'm a marketing professional. I've worked in television, I've worked in film, and I've worked in music. And integration is what is key. How do all the parties at the table work together in tandem? That's how you really achieve success. Having success on one channel and lack of success on another channel is going to limit your results long term. So you want to make sure that you have thought about in advance what you'd like to see on each one of those platforms and take those ideas to the table and maybe even make it part of your contract, because sometimes people don't always adhere to contracts. You're very excited, you sign your deal, they've said that they're going to do theatrical, and then sometimes they don't. Well, who is the television person, and do I ever get a chance to talk to them? So I think that's very key, that one of the most important things about success in content and distribution is how well is everything integrated. The publicity, the outreach, the television, the digital. How many publicists are there? The network has a publicist, the digital Netflix has a publicist, PBS has a publicist, so all of those publicists have to talk to each other at one point in time so that you get the maximum. It's about synergy and bringing all of the pieces together.
So then actually that kind of...
Can I just add something real quick? I mean, just to give you an example with the Panthers, we had a weekly phone call every Tuesday at 12:30, starting in April, and it went all the way until December, every single week. And there were about 15 people on that call every week. There was, publicists, in LA, publicists in New York, the general publicist, the booker, Sonya, me, Marcia, social media person from Firelight, PBS, PBSD. Literally, and we did this every single week. We had a standing call at 12:30 on Tuesdays, and this was just part of what we had to do. We tried to limit it to an hour, so it did have a limit, but that was what we did, and I think it was important. I think too, I think as Dawn was talking about, there was also a sense of this being an experiment, this journey that we were all on together. And that was great, because it was. I think every film is different. What works in distribution 2 years ago might not work today, and so there was this real sense that we were all in this thing together. And how can we all fit all these pieces together and make it work? And my piece was to go to screenings every week.
And that actually also kind of leads to the question that I had for you, Dolly, which is when you're working with filmmakers, when you're working on these films, what do you think the sort of biggest mistakes are that filmmakers make, right? Mm-hmm. And what is the one thing that you tell a filmmaker that they never listen to?
Well, thank you. I think that the most important thing is long-term planning. So the time to think about your outreach strategy is not when you're at Sundance. It's not even when you complete the film. It's 6 months or a year before then, because it's out of the gate at Sundance. We're here, things are happening, it could be acquired, while you're here. Once it's out of the gate, it's out of the gate. Even after the distribution deal has been done, I worked on I worked on two interesting projects recently, the Tug theatrical for Free Angela and All Political Prisoners. And I started on that about 6 weeks ahead of time. Now that was a pretty ambitious, undertaking. With Finding Fela, I had about 3 months, but that still really isn't enough time when you're talking about cultivating a national partnership. National organizations are large corporate entities, essentially, and they have chapters all around the country, and they do not make decisions quickly, no matter how much they love your film. So that's one thing. The second thing is that even on a local level, everyone has someone that they have to go to, and they have programs and initiatives, and no matter how much they love your film, coming to them 6 weeks before you want them to do something is just, it's not really enough planning. And I think that when you look at films like The Panther, or when you look at films like American Promise, they spend a lot of time investing and having brainstorming meetings and conversations and finding funding. The second biggest mistake is you have to have money. There's no mistake about it. Do not put every penny of your money, of the budget into the film. That doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. So what you need to find a place to cut a corner if you have not secured a grant, if you have not secured a loan, if your distributor is not, do not depend on the distributor to spend money on your film. That's the third mistake. You need to have your own money, and you should plan for it in advance. And it shouldn't be $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 is cutting it by the hair of your chinny chin chin. You really need to have, $75,000, $100 if you're going to have an impactful campaign. Grassroots is great. Social media is fantastic, but traditional media still plays an impact in how many people go out to the theater or are talking about your film. Most publicists of any weight are going to cost you at least $10,000. Now, if you only raise $10,000, I'm not sure where you're going to go, and I'm not completely convinced that publicity is enough to get somebody to get up out of their bed and go to the theater. It has to be, remember again, an integrated campaign, marketing money, advertising money. The last thing I would say is you have to have a team. It's very important to engage. I think one of the things that I admire so much about Firelight Media is all the people from Firelight Media, raise your hands. And they've still got people back in New York. So this is, when you think about entertainment, this is entertainment, it is social impact, but to the public, it is still a form of entertainment, and it requires a team. So you have to think about who your team is going to be and what their skill set is. Recently, people have been talking about the value and importance of having a marketing person on your team who's a producer. Because once you finish the film, you may be a little bit tired and ready to move on to the next project. But you need to have somebody on your team like Sonya, like Moira, to continue on with the project, to manage all of those partners and those commitments that you've made to, and to roll up their sleeves and make all of those calls, and to make sure that every email went out and that you had a social media campaign. So to repeat, 1, money is important, planning and preparation is important, especially for documentary filmmakers. If you're going to really have an impact, you can't spend 2 years making a wonderful film, that was really important to you, and then not live up to the responsibility of having that impact, in my opinion.
And what was the thing when I said, what is the one mistake that filmmakers just don't ever want to hear? The advice they don't want to hear, the thing that they never do.
I think, on the whole, it would probably be the long-term planning. Really thinking about what you want the outcomes to be a year in advance, and actually talking about it, and not, thinking that all things are going to come together. I think that would be probably the number one. You have to plan in advance. If you have a great plan, you're going to have great outcomes.
Fantastic. And I also wanted to talk to both of you, because I'm always interested in, I think mistakes, we can always learn from our mistakes, If you can go back and sort of, when you're thinking about the campaign that you built and everything, all the engagement, what was the one thing that if you can go back and change or add, what would it be?
Yeah, I try not to think like that. It drives me crazy. I mean, I try
I'm
not
just
to
thinking
think
about in
mistakes.
terms of people, because people need to understand what they can do, as opposed to just in terms of personally, more sort of like, somebody that they can learn from, something that maybe you guys didn't do, something that you missed, that someone else can then learn from.
I can share something too.
Yep. For this project in particular, I think because the release window was an entire year, and we actually didn't, unlike our last campaigns, we didn't raise a lot of impact dollars, dedicated impact dollars. We raised $65 to support and enhance the theatrical release. But we didn't raise impact dollars, and I think what's really key with any film where you're doing a really robust impact campaign and really engaging and using the film to lift up a conversation or to support some kind of social justice movement building, is engaging the subjects in that film. And not just the promotions, not just bringing them to the festival and kind of trotting them around, but really engaging them on a deep and respectful way. And I think to do that, you need resources to support them. And I think we don't often think about raising money. We're thinking it's hard enough to get the money for the film, and then I got to raise money for this team, and then I got to raise money, and somehow I got to live, and now I got to raise money also for the subjects to participate. But, it's our passion to make film. It's my job to do this. The subject is a remarkable individual who probably has a day job and some kids, and you're asking them to go to this screening and to go here. And I'm sure out of the goodness of their heart, because this is their life or this is their passion, they participate. But it's a real financial burden, I think, to engage subjects in this kind of process, especially when it's a 12-month window. And we're asking them, it's a festival, and now it's a theatrical, and then can you do some broadcast promotion? So I think in hindsight, and then moving forward, I want to make sure we always have a nice budget to be able to support the few, not all 40 of them, we can't have the whole Panther Party, but a few individuals that we know in advance, we got their back, we'll cover them so that it's not so much of a burden to participate.
I thought of one example that certainly looking back on the experience with Panthers, I would like to have done differently, and something that actually might be helpful to Dawn. But if you are dealing with a film, particularly something that's especially sensitive, I think that there needs to be real clear and close communication with your theater partners. We ran into a situation in Baltimore when Panthers came and premiered in Baltimore, where things were so sensitive that we ended up having to shut down a screening of the film for the entire day. Well, we didn't. Not we. The royal we. The theater. And those are things that are difficult to predict, but at the same time, I think even that additional level of extra effort on our part just to have some dialogue or some sort of talking points that we could share with partners are the types of things that would create the forum for us not to be in situations like that.
Can I add a couple of things? I think one thing is that I would say probably for 80% or so of projects that are made, documentaries that are made about social issues, there are partners there who can fund some of the impact, and that they need to be identified early on, because a lot of times there is money out there. The thing about it, sometimes it's very strange, like what project can you get money for and what you can't. So Freedom Summer, Freedom Riders, we were able to raise money to do impact. The Panthers was very, very hard. There's not an organization that is supporting, revolutionaries, with guns, 50 years ago. I say the Ford Foundation did come in, very late on and give us some money that helped us finish the film and get it out there. But the money was just not laying around. I think of a number of years back, we worked on two films that were here at actually one wasn't here at Sundance. We worked on two films. One was Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, about hip hop. The other was Jonestown, The Life and Death of People's Temple. Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, which was critical of hip hop, was able to raise tons of money, right, for its impact. Jonestown, a film about a preacher that basically murders 900 people, was not able to raise a penny. Okay, we were shortlisted for the Academy Award, but we could not raise a penny, for impact on that film. So it really depends, on the film. The other thing, one thing I just want to say too about the theatrical before I forget, because probably the best advice that I think we got on theatrical was that theaters only care about the 7 o'clock show, and the 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock show on the weekend. That's all. Thomas Allen Harris, who did Through a Lens Darkly, said, if you can fill the film, if you can fill the theater at 7 o'clock every night, and then at 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock on the weekend, the theaters will look at that as a huge success. And that became our focus. Okay, nobody goes to the theater at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday. And they don't expect it to. But if you fill that theater, we premiered at Film Forum in New York and were held over for 8 weeks. because of that strategy. That's where we concentrated all our effort, was that 7 o'clock show, was to fill it up. And what happens too is and it's a big thing, what happens for me going around to that first, the premiere screenings, and why you do that is, for whatever reason, I never quite understand. People want to go to the film if the director is there, or people from the film are there. They turn out. And then that sells out, then they tell their friends. And they tell other people, and and that's how the film keeps the momentum going, because we don't have the commercials to do that. So I think again, that was probably the best piece of advice we got, was try to fill up that 7 o'clock show.
So one, I guess, one piece of wisdom I would share about theatrical is I think you have to really think about your film. One of the things that I noticed, and both Sonya and Stanley touched on this, but a lot of art house cinemas, as he mentioned, they will allow you to have host a Q&A on the opening night if the director is there. But if you've engaged, 4 to 5 organizations locally or even nationally, and they've garnered their support by giving you emails or advertising or whatever, they're really looking for a return. And what I found challenging sometimes inside of the larger art house chains is that I didn't think that they understood the diverse audience well enough to know that by allowing those organizations to be co-host and do a Q&A of every single screening, it would increase attendance. That's where I think models like Tug come in, because they create a larger window of time for you to spend in the theater, and it allows each one of those organizations that you've engaged to participate at the level that they'd like to. So I think that's something to keep in mind, because not having their full participation in the Q&A can also impact the results in the attendance.
But because we're also really sort of thinking about how, your Kickstarter campaigns also help to push your theatrical, right? As opposed to sort of more what the theatrical, how did you sort of engage those audiences? How did you, in terms of like making sure you had everybody's email address? Like, what were the simple things that you did afterwards to continue to engage your audience? I know I always got, amazing emails from Firelight, sort of always telling me about screenings around the country. And those were actually great ways for me to be able to push out to people that I know, all over. So what were sort of the strategic ways that you used online, and how did you use it sort of, the campaign then that you did to actually push out theatrical? And then for you right now, how are you going to continue that with the theatrical, and with, even, how are you engaging people online in terms of Twitter, in terms of, the social media, to really be able to sort of showcase what Trapped is going to be doing afterwards?
We have, I'm glad to hear, we have a really healthy budget. And we focused a lot of time raising money for outreach. So we are trying to raise more than $400,000 for the outreach campaign. We have $260 already, so it's doable. It's kind of hard to feel like, oh my God, I'm still raising money. I raised that much money, but it actually takes that much money. And what it takes that money to do is not only pay for all the advertising in the theaters, because you got to pay that up front, but to pay for people who will not be fatigued when I am fatigued. And I can't fly to the festival and email every backer. So Kickstarter really, because they have a dedicated team for documentary, you have this wealth of knowledge of what works. And so they pushed us so hard to develop our email list, to write down go as far and wide as we could with people that we could reach out to and capture those messages. And we actually, before we launched our campaign, we already had our milestone messages done with little video things. So we had those in our pocket, so we weren't stressing about, we got to make those so we knew when those would drop. We lined up our celebrity people for when things were flagging, when we needed to raise people up, and we saved our big guns, the Planned Parenthood blast, for the end. So then it looked like momentum was happening. And then along the way, I have the best digital producer ever. His name is Bryce Kirchhoff. None of you can hire him because he works for me. But he is just a master at keeping the small details. He writes notes about, he goes behind the scenes Kickstarter, the interface, I've been told, I haven't done it myself, I cop to it, but you can see who clicks through on your message. So Bryce would send me a report. We are having a 60% click through. That is amazing. We got to do the same message again, because it was like people like this messaging. So he keeps that data and we tailor our messages that way. And then when we send updates, we send the ones that the people like the most. So we have all those emails, we have all those groups. We gave them enough time. We started working with Planned Parenthood a year and a half ago with NARAL, same thing. So, before there was any movie, we were like, we're in this topic. We just want you to know we're here. We had nothing to show them because you can't show somebody something beforehand, so they had not seen the movie, and so we cultivated that relationship. So now we have a very robust list. I have our super talented producer who will put out messaging. He also saw who our high donors are, and then our producer went back to those people and said, we now have a movie, we're in Sundance, now's the time to kick in, please come help us. So we got places like the Harnish Foundation came in again. Go back to your supporters. Now you're successful, like they've invested in you and you delivered for them. Keep those relationships going. And those people come in with money at really critical times, and then they have networks. So always ask your networks to use their networks, because those are people that's beyond your choir. And that's all our big goal, is to get beyond our own little myopic choirs.
That's really good. I'm learning. I hope someone's taking notes, because I can't take notes from Don. I mean, the crowdfunding campaign was really important for us as an organization. I think I think we were going to try to launch it at Sundance, and everyone was like, "No, you don't have enough time." We were thinking in December to launch it in Sundance. They're like, you need to give yourselves real time to prepare for this. And I'm really glad we did. We launched in April after our Sundance release, and that gave us months to pull together a team of interns, of other staff, to prepare ourselves, to prepare that content calendar. So we had all of, a lot of our content ready to sort of send out automatically over the 30-month window. And I think that kind of preparation was really key, and also really building our database. I mean, as an organization, it helped us enormously to build our database just to be able to launch our Kickstarter. And obviously it grew as a result, but it forced us to really, put our ducks in an order in a way that I don't think we had. I mean, for an organization that's been around as long as we have. So it helped us enormously. I think we also thought about we talk about kind of Black audiences and in particular, and we were thinking about real segmented, we were thinking about who's going to reach millennials, who's going to reach Gen X, who's going to reach baby boomers, and who are the kind of high profile or cultural critics or ambassadors that we could kind of leverage or reach out to help reach those various audiences for our Kickstarter. The Henry Louis Gates and the Ava DuVernays and the DeRay McKessons, we were thinking who are those and really leaned on them heavily through that month. But I think more importantly, I think what I learned as someone who was kind of managing the back end of the Kickstarter and sort of the relationship that you're now in with 950 people for us is what I made sure to do is make the Kickstarter backers are really special and important. And we really love that relationship. So when you take on that role, we were in touch, weekly for a very long time, and then it went to monthly, but really kept that relationship going to really thank them. Even when the money's already in the bank, you're constantly thanking that group because they are your ambassador for theatrical, for broadcast. But not only that, we have a newsletter for our organization. We have social media. We made sure that the message that goes to Kickstarter is very unique, insider, feels like inside information, and it's different than what we said on our newsletter for our organization about the film. It's different from what we said on social media, and we wanted the people in Kickstarter to feel like y'all are really you helped us make this film. And the messaging was different. The tone was different. It's more familiar. So I think those little touches, really help build that sense of camaraderie with, your crowdfunding backers. And then I think that in turn turns into them really doing some supportive work for you.
I'll just quickly add that I think that in this arena, this is especially important place for you to have real close consultation with your broadcaster, especially if your broadcaster is PBS. Because there are so many ways in which we are thrilled that filmmakers are able to find additional resources to top up and to do the things that they need to do to execute the film properly. But we want to make sure that we're doing that in lockstep. So even when it comes to your digital strategy for what platform you're going to use for your website for the film and how that then relates back to, let's say, PBS's website and the collection of emails and who owns the emails and making sure that all of those things are happening in the right way through very close and careful consultation, you can be successful. So.
That's great. And we want to throw it, make sure you guys get a couple questions in. So wanted to throw it out to the audience to see if you had any questions for the group or for the panel. Go ahead, Peter.
This has been a great panel, and everybody, I think, has learned a lot, so Firelight Media rocks. I just want to add two things. One, you didn't really talk about community screenings, and I think they're so important to complement what you're doing theatrically. And in a community screening situation, you can have way more time than you can have in a theater for a Q&A. You can build an event around it. People can network before and after. And then those people can all be spreading the word about your movie going forward. So I think to have that work with your theatrical. And then also think about showing your film at events, conventions, conferences, which take way long lead time. But that can make a really big difference because if you think about compared to film festivals, well, film festivals are mostly local. So people come from one city or going to see the films, except for some national ones like Sundance. But with conventions, they may be national. And so people are coming from all across the country, and they're going back to their towns, and they're going to spread the word about your movie. And that's a huge opportunity. And then the last thing is what you did with Kickstarter was not just do great for the movie. You started to build those relationships now with your backers, and you're going to take those people with you to every film that you do going forward. And if there's a spectrum to me of independence, what correlates with greater independence is having a bigger audience that's supporting you. And that's just always think about that.
That was great. I think. What?
You want to say who you are so people know who you are?
I'm Peter Broderick, and I help filmmakers with distribution strategies.
The king of distribution.
That's it.
The king of distribution strategies. I think all of that was great. I think one of the things to hear, especially for me, I think one of the, yes, what we didn't do well before, I think one of the things that we did not do well is kind of hook up with conventions and those kind of things, because you do need a super long lead time. I mean, it's super long. People are planning their convention, a year over a year out, and we're like, oh, we should be at the National Association of Black Journalists. And by the time we call them 6 months out, the thing is set. It's really hard. And you also, I think in that, if you can, any way that you could, as a director, producer of these films, if you can have help. Because we're talking about all these things, and I know it sounds like a lot, but as we talked about the Firelight team, and Dawn has talked about her team. You do need help. I mean, and even if that's, if you've got the smartest intern who then, you're kind of moving up through the system is something that we do. You do need help, because as a filmmaker, the last thing I'm thinking about as I'm working on the Black Panthers is the National Association of Black Journalists.
I would just say, just to shout out Independent Lens, we are also doing community screenings. Typically, that's all of what we do. But because we had a theatrical, we actually had to hold back, which was really difficult, because we had all these national partners who wanted to own their screenings. And we had to tell them, you can't, because we're having a theatrical. You can participate in that, but you have to wait until broadcast, which is now another 6 months down the road. So we are doing community screenings as part of the Independent Lens pop-up, which is really great. But we did sneak in one community screening, which was a promise we made to Kickstarter backers, in which we got the theatrical train to allow, which is we took the film to Ferguson. And that was a really important promise we made to the folks of Ferguson, to the filmmaker, to the Panthers. Everybody wanted it to get to Ferguson, and the theatrical chain allowed us to do just that one.
And just to let you all know, this is really really also just the tip of the iceberg because we haven't even touched like the educational market and universities. There's so many different avenues. Anyone else? Does anyone have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amy Littlefield from Democracy Now! I'm wondering, it's a national conversation that we're seeing now for the second year in a row about the shocking whiteness of the Oscars. And the Academy's now come out saying that they are going to double representation of women and people of color. I'm wondering if Dawn or Stanley would want to weigh in here on, as filmmakers, where do you go from here? Where even when these films have a wide distribution and get a lot of attention, they're not getting the institutional recognition that they deserve.
Yeah, I thank you for asking that question because I think, Stanley won't say this, but I think it is an absolute disgrace that the Black Panthers, one of the most celebrated films of this year in documentary with this incredible broadcast and at this time in American history, was not recognized. And I was embarrassed for my documentary community that was the case. So I am hopeful that people are continuing this conversation. As filmmakers, we're in a complicated position because you want to support your other filmmakers. I don't want to detract from their work, but I want to make sure that they're recognizing mine and the people around me. So I'm glad the Academy is feeling pushed. I'm glad they're going to keep doing some things. We'll see what happens, but I think one thing you can count on is we're not going to be quiet about it. So, it's super great to get that kind of recognition, but I think one of the reasons why, I model my work after what Firelight does, and I do want to say really quickly, we're both talking about very big campaigns, and so I don't want somebody who's thinking about a smaller campaign to be discouraged about that. I think the message you should take from our knowledge is at whatever level your campaign is, you need to be intentional and figure out what resources you have and make the best of those. And then you grow. I didn't do all this with Gideon's Army, and I learned about it, and I learned that I needed to have X, Y, and Z, and worked really hard to raise the money to pay the right people. But I'm really glad you asked that question. I don't know if Stanley.
No, I think you answered.
Yeah, got your back.
Thank you.
But honestly, I think a lot of the problem with the Oscar conversation is that it's actually missing the bigger picture, which is that there are not a lot of films that are being funded and supported by people of color. It is very disappointing when you think about the number of documentary filmmakers who are of color who get funded. Firelight Media is definitely really trying to do something in terms of changing that. But if you have a majority of the films that are being made about people of color by white people, that does not mean that they shouldn't make those films. But why are we not raising the question of why are there not more filmmakers of color who are able to make those films? There are tons of quality filmmakers out there that cannot get funded. And that's the bigger problem. And people are looking at the issue of the Oscars in this little myopic way. Yes, everybody wants to be recognized by a larger institution, but we need to have at least 50 Stanleys and 50 Dawns. There shouldn't only be, 2 right up.
And that's exactly going to work.
Exactly. And also,
I would just say
the other thing, it's not just,
right.
When I say diversity, I'm not talking about black people, I'm talking about Asians, Native Americans. There are definitely a lot of Latinos out here. Why are we not embracing the larger conversation?
Hi, I just wanted to echo, I'm a programmer at an independent art house cinema in New York, and just wanted to echo what you're saying. It is so important to be prepared, to tweet, to have your whole social network set up. And also, if they don't use Tug, please encourage people to directly reach out to their cinema. We don't use it, we don't need to. We have a very engaged membership. And especially if a member says, I want to see this, I'll look into it and program it.
And what theater?
Oh, sorry. The Jacob Burns Film Center in Westchester County, New York.
One more question.
So we have time for one more question. And then one more question? Go ahead, right here.
Currently we're in pre-production, production, and of course, I think a lot of it is how do we get to that next step? And I know I've been hearing all this about planning and making sure that everything's in line, building a team. But even just with the small team that we do have, we're looking to make sure that we find, correct funding and even just the right people. I think that's always something to do. So any networks or anything that you can recommend for like the early stages of, of documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, there's the one thing I love, one of the many things I love about the documentary community is it is a community. So you should, first of all, congratulate yourself for coming here because we're all here. So talk to as many people as you can. Be nice to people on the bus. I met a woman in line at the women's brunch last year, and she gave us $100,000. So, I'm going to that brunch this year. But this, you need to put yourself where people in our industry are and tell them and talk about your work, but also listen about their work. It's a very much give and take. It's so important that we support each other's work. So don't just talk about yourself. If you champion other people's work, go support their screenings. You'll learn from their experiences. Sundance Institute has a number of fine programs. Take the initiative, find out what their funding and what their requirements are before you call and ask them, can I meet with you? Tribeca has great programs. Catapult Film Fund is a great early money in. They put money in before you even have a trailer. So if you start to poke around, you'll start to see the names come up where you can find. And when we say planning, there's stages of planning. So at this stage, you need to be focused on making a good movie. Like that's your job. But that as you go along, if you meet people who are helpful, take their card and put it in a file. It's as easy as just having a manila folder, stick everybody's name in with a little note about what was helpful. So when you get to the stage of impact, you've been building it up over this last year while you're in production. Oh, this was a great organized group on the ground in our main city. That's what we mean by planning. It's not that you have to have a 15-person outreach team before you even know what your movie is.
Okay, real quick, we run something called the Firelight Media Documentary Lab. I think we just changed the name again. So if you go to our website, which is firelightmedia.org, and you look up Producers Lab, which is what the lab was, you look up Producers Lab, it'll tell you about the lab and how to apply. Can I just have a show of hands, people who are here, are in the lab now or have come through the lab? Okay. So we do have some people here who've come through the lab. It is for producers of color all over the country. We work with 20 filmmakers at a time. You can apply at any time. It's to help people get their films made, done, and out there. Oh, and Moira right there has cards that tell you a little bit more information about the lab. That's what we do. We're dedicated to trying to get, diverse voice. It's everywhere. It's national. We have a filmmaker who's here who's from Hawaii. A native Hawaiian, so there are filmmakers from all over. And
I'll just quickly add, ITVS has its open call process. You should reach out through POV. And don't forget, particularly for diverse content by diverse makers, don't forget about the National Minority Consortia groups, so whether that's Latino Public Broadcasting, NBPC, you name it. Those are absolutely avenues.
And also, look, Nidri's over there with the diversity fund as well, development fund.
Leslie,
all the money makers.
So those are all people and places that can help you get started, champion your work, let them know, the same people that you see now, you come back next year and you're in production, you'll see them here, then you come back the next year and your film will be here, and you'll see the same people. So, these people are here, they'll talk to you, make yourself known.
There are 3 films that we came and had meetings with folks, casual meetings, just showing us work product last year that we hope are on the way to being on our air. So you're on the right track.
So the takeaway is be prepared, know who your funders are, right? And be nice, because you never know who's going to give you $100,000 after meeting them in line. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to Kickstarter. Thank you so much to Firelight Media.